So, what we can be sure of is that in this unfolding, we don't find the true nature in the comfort zone of the mind. We don't find what it is we are seeking in the comfort of what is known by the mind. What we have learned is to stay safe. We have learned to stay safe. And on some level, of course, that's very sensible. And it has been useful. But it is not so useful when we are called to freedom. It is not about anything that the mind could imagine, but it is that life itself will come in and bring forward whatever it takes to push us out of the comfort zone and out of the sense of safety, and so that we can open up the protections and hiding places that we have learned. Now, these situations in life can be small surrenders, and they can be big surrenders. And we could say that the deeper in we are, the bigger the surrenders, the bigger the pieces that come forward. Because the big pieces only come forward when there's a readiness, and the readiness is a depth of being that where there is a knowing of what is not moving and changing, an unquestionable stability that allows what may be seen as more intense or more challenging to come forward. Now, even speaking that, the mind could conceptualize and come up with all kinds of ideas about that. But by the time that we are in deep enough that the big chunks of cheese start coming in, we are established in this knowing. We're established that all that is longed for is this freedom, and that whatever happens, it's going to be met, right? The wisdom doesn't push us until there is a depth of maturity to be able to meet and receive and open to the grace. So what is so important in this unfolding is not to listen to anything and conceptualize or try to understand or work out with the mind what that is all about, because we cannot actually measure in any worldly way the maturity. We have no idea where we are in this unfolding. So it's pointless, absolutely pointless. It's about being the being and coming to such a depth of unquestionable knowing of being established in the being, and the recognition that the being is the unmoving, unchanging, undisturbed, unwavering stability. It is the ground of being, right? It's the ground. And the ground is not like a grounded sense that the body and the me might look for. The ground of being is to be grounded in the presence, the one presence that is. And so to be grounded in presence, to be grounded in the unmoving and unchanging, which allows whatever happens in life to be seen in awareness, illuminated, and the stresses that might arise in the nervous system as triggers, resistances, upset, anxiety, fears, conditioning, all of this kind of thing, that it can be allowed naturally, right? That there is a wisdom that is moving all of this, an intelligence that is kind, is natural and simple. Now, it might not always feel like that to the mind and the me, because the me wants things my way, and the me will feel disturbed when things come in that don't feel like what I want. What we're talking about is something just deeper and happening in a subtler realm of our being, we could say, a subtler frequency of our being. This is not about what the me wants. It's not about even being able to understand with the mind. It's about being established in the simplicity of being. And being established in the simplicity of being is being the awareness, the openness, the naturalness, where you can confirm in direct experience a sense of freedom, a sense of peace, a sense of this natural, open being. That it's the being itself that confirms this, has nothing to do with the mind. It's not an experience that comes and goes. It's about recognizing that before everything, between everything, underneath everything, there is this stable ground. And the stable ground is the being, the unmoving, unchanging, natural being. And it is to be here as deeply as the remembering is here. Again, we cannot do anything to force a deepening. We cannot do anything. And of course, that is what is so frustrating to the mind. So even as these words come, they are not instructions. Pointings, true pointings are not instructions to follow. True pointings are immediate. They land immediately in the intelligence that you are, and the intelligence recognizes its own wise frequency. And when there is a recognition in the intelligence, it's where consciousness itself recognizes and remembers itself consciously. We could say is consciously awake or aware of itself. And this recognition of a certain frequency brings a quietening and a calming and a sense of enlivening of the stillness and the silence, and a recognition, a remembering of the silent being. That what is being pointed to is the stillness, the silence, the unmoving, unchanging, natural openness that is the felt sense of being. We could say the felt sense of simple existence. We could say the sense I am, I am, I am. Not someone that is, not identification with the body, but the sense I am. As there's a focus on the presence I am, the sense of where the I am presence is not limited at the point of the body-mind, but is unlimited and boundless. And so here, in the openness of being, we open naturally to the remembering of the unbounded field, the unbounded, unlimited, impersonal field of being. And in the unbounded, unlimited field of being, there is a naturalness here, a naturalness that is the true essence nature. It is the natural being that is shared by all beings. And we start to resonate here, where consciousness is consciously awake to itself and starts to resonate with itself, enlivened and remembering the true frequency. And it is this remembering of the stillness, of the silence, of the simple presence that is this stable ground, the constant, the stability of being. And the more that the being itself recognizes itself, the sense of being personal and separate starts to dissolve into being the unlimited, impersonal, undivided reality. And there is such a freedom and beauty in this revelation. There is peace here. There is openness here. There is a natural honesty here, a transparency, a clarity, that this is the truth of who you are, that the light is here as the radiance of a heart that is open and free. And so then in the resting here, as life happens, right? As life happens, there is this ground, this illumined, open radiance of the heart, the true heart, that can receive it all. It's totally open to it all. And this is what allows life as the guide, as the grace, to flow and be received without resistance. And this is where we can receive the wisdom of life. And the wisdom of life is what humbles us and strips us. Now, this part is a little tricky because the humbling and the stripping is a removing of our protections. It's a dissolving of our protective mechanisms. And of course, the me has a great investment in the protective mechanisms. And so as life attempts to humble and strip the protective mechanisms away, taking us out of the comfort zone, kind of shattering our sense of safety on a certain level, what happens in the me and the mind and the sense of the character is there is a desperate grabbing on, trying to preserve the protections, trying to preserve the safety. And of course, there's a natural instinct in that. And that is why we need the ground of being, which is the awareness, the openness that can illuminate anything that happens that feels like a trigger, so that we don't just move in the learned ways. So the learned ways would be to feel a trigger or a resistance or some kind of stress arising, and to immediately attempt to project that away, going to the mind, going to a story, making a projection of blame onto someone, or internalizing and going to a guilt and a shame, or an attempt to just project it by numbing, right? Project it just outward like a distraction, a deflection. So all of these are the learned ways that the collective moves, right? The collective moves, separation moves in these protective ways. And so there is a certain sense of this is the instinct of what has been learned. So to be with all of this in a different way, when it feels like our safety is threatened, how to not move, to defend and keep the sense of safety, how to not move to the instinctual defense and protection when there feels like a threat. And what it is that we can only meet this threat, this sense of threat or challenge to our safety, our learned safety mechanisms, when we have this ground of being and we have the openness in awareness to illumine what is happening and to recognize that this is old stress arising. And can we be with this old stress as the unmoving, unchanging, without reacting and going to the strategies of protection or numbing? Can we open to receive what is happening and be with what is happening from a grounded, illumined openness that has the presence to meet whatever is happening in the life, in the nervous system, right? Because where the trigger is, where the charge is, where the challenge or the threat is felt is in a nervous system that comes to this sense of either frozen or fight or flight, right? It comes to one of these kind of instinctual places. And in order to not just react and move in this way, we have to be able to illumine and see what is going on and be the presence that can be here with it, illuminate it, so that we can move in a different way that offers the possibility of freeing these deeply held discordant patterns. So in the first instance, we start to meet these triggers. The way that the wisdom works is it brings the triggers forward that are more like the surface suppressions, right? The conditionings, the resistances. And so we start to meet these places. And this is where the humbling starts to happen. And it's also where the maturing starts to happen in our ability to meet. To be able to receive, to feel the sensations in the nervous system and open to receive what is happening, to listen to the narrative, if there is one, without collaborating and being hooked into it and projecting, but being able to listen and receive while being aware of what's happening in the nervous system, what's happening in the sense of the body. And can we be with the sensation? Can we be present with the sensation? Now, sometimes it can feel like a lot to be present with the sensation. And if we can't, if we feel that we can't be present with it, that we keep going to the mind, it's then to come to the bridge of either noticing the aliveness, the energy of the feelings, or to focus upon the breath. Focus upon the breath, right? We can also come to tap upon the heart in a way to just bring the attention. It just brings the attention away from the mind and the habitual response to just come to the heart, or just to bring the hand to the heart. To tap on the heart is just another way so we can come to the breath, watching the breath, focusing upon the breath being very smooth, just as a way of bringing a deeper calming to the system when there is reactivity wanting to come forward. So once we have come to be able to be present, of course, once we are present, we are the presence of being. We're here now. We're here, present with whatever's arising, and then more able to allow the sensations, allow the sense of the trigger, allow what is arising, the feelings, the aliveness in the body, the sensations. And it's to be able to just be so naturally awake and aware with what is arising. Now, if the mind is bringing forward a narrative that it's distracted by, then it's to listen to the narrative, listen to the story that's being told, or listen to the story that the mind is telling, because there is a wisdom and there is something very profound in allowing the expression to come forward. In allowing the expression to come forward, all of the places in the young life where we were not met with presence, we were not listened to. It's like our experience of whatever stress was arising was invalidated, right? We didn't feel seen and heard and allowed to feel the way that we were feeling. We weren't met with presence and openness because we were having the parents' protections projected upon us, right? Their need for safety projected upon us. So don't feel like that, because I don't feel safe when you feel like that. So here's a distraction, here's a diversion, or here's just quite simply being told, you're not allowed to be angry, you're going to go to your room, right? Or sit on the step, or whatever it is, until you stop that. Right? So we were stopped in our the natural validation of what was happening in the nervous system. So what we're speaking of here is that when a reaction happens because of something that happens in life, there's a wisdom of life that's bringing it forward. And the wisdom of life that's bringing it forward is offering us this opportunity to meet it. But we have to be able to meet it, right? So that's why we're breaking it down here. We're breaking it down so that we can recognize, for some, it's very easy just to meet it. There's an adeptness at meeting it. And for some, it's newer and there's not such an ease. So if it doesn't feel easy, or if something comes in that is like a shock, or something that feels big, and you feel like you're really spinning in it, then it's just to be able to stop, be aware, or at least recognize, wow, there's spinning in this happening. This is like a shock. This feels like something big. And that's when it's to, yes, come to the energy of the nervous system. But if that feels like so alive in the nervous system that it doesn't feel like you can be with it, then to start with the breath, or coming to focus the attention on the heart, either with bringing the hand to the heart or just tapping into the heart, just settles the energy. Once you feel settled, then you can start feeling the energy, because you're feeling the energy then as the presence, right? You come to the heart and you feel the presence of being. Of course, checking the presence of being is important when it comes into awareness, because this is the light, the immovable, unchanging presence. And when there's the ability to recognize the being is here, the true essence nature, you are here as the presence that can hold it all. But what we open to is that we go backwards and forwards between the presence and opening to the sensations that are coming. And we go backwards and forwards so that we can really allow whatever stress is in the nervous system to truly be met and not be directed away from, right? That we're not directing the attention to transcend away from it. We're checking that the presence of being is here in the knowing of the unmoving nature. And once we have this stable ground, then we open in total welcoming as the presence that says, okay, what is going on? You are welcome. You whatever is happening in your system is being validated, right? That it's being acknowledged. You're allowed to feel the way you feel right now. You're allowed to have this energy moving, because that which learnt to suppress and that which was repressed, really pushed down, these patterns in consciousness that are discordant, that have been held really tight in limitation, if they're trying to surface, then they need the stable ground to surface into. They need the presence, the safety of the being to surface into. Because what's happening is that the learned safety mechanism is being challenged. And when the learned safety mechanism is being challenged, we can say to these places, oh, you're safe, you're okay. But they're going to be like, no way. Right? And that reaction is going to be in the nervous system. But once we recognize the presence of being is here, the presence itself is the ultimate safety. And we don't have to say to these places, you're safe, you're okay. And we don't have to create like a mood. It's that the presence itself says, there's something bigger here. And of course, this is all happening in consciousness, in the unseen and the unspoken. But what's happening is the presence of being says, still, silent, immovable. It's kind of like the feeling that a child might have when the mother is at home, right? You're safe. You're safe, right? You're safe, you're free to move as you want. You're held, presence is here. And that allows that whatever's happening in the nervous system, that essentially, curiously, is the old stress that was suppressed and pushed down, just trying to surface. It's discordant energy in the consciousness that is trying to free itself, right? This is the language of consciousness. The language of consciousness says it's discordant patterns that have been held in limitation, that are basically trying to free themselves, come to the light, come to the true essence nature, that are trying to untangle themselves. In the language of the relative experience, we might say it's the old stress that was repressed in the childhood that's trying to surface into love, into presence, and come out of suppression and repression. So the language doesn't really matter. But again, where we hear it acts as a bridge, acts as a bridge that validates and acknowledges without indulging the story and identifying with the story, but offers a presence that doesn't act out that invalidating sense of, I'm not comfortable with what you're bringing up, right? Because we could do this within our own experience. We can say, I'm not comfortable with what is coming forward here. So please go away. Please go back down, right? So this is when the sense of safety is challenged. The instinct is to try to push it away. And it will come in as all kinds of mechanisms that will try to criticize, it will try to numb it, it will try to defend it, it will use all of its learned strategies to push these kind of energies that are surfacing just through the happenings of life. We'll try to push it away. So what we're expressing here is how to shift from the false sense of safety that's a strategy, which is like the needs met structure that we speak of, how to shift from a false sense of safety when there is a trigger in the nervous system to the true safety of the presence of being, right? So that we can allow whatever is surfacing to know a deep natural safety, that it's being held in presence, it's welcome, and that somehow it's allowed. It's allowed to feel the way it feels. And that's when we can access the feelings and the sensations of the nervous system and allow the natural unraveling in the nervous system to happen, held in presence. And this is what we would experience as something stressful arising, and this trigger or this charge, and that as we are present with it, it starts to naturally, in its own timing, dissolve, dissipate, soften, and eventually, in its own readiness, disappear, right? Because this is unwinding a discordant pattern in consciousness. Sometimes it might be spoken as like an area of tension or holding in the somatic field, something like that, right? So this is allowing the stress and the tension that's being held and is being held, that's trying to surface, to actually come forward. Now, sometimes as this is coming forward, there can be distractions that come in the mind where the story just keeps wanting to replay itself. And that's where we want to listen to the story without identifying and projecting. We want to just allow the expression to come forward into the kindness, into the receiving, and to have a completely different experience to the experience that it had that taught it the safety strategies which play out as suppressing and distracting and numbing, right? So this is why it's important to have this ground of being, and why we keep coming to the ground of being. Now we can open in the ground of being, and we can be in the transcendent, and we can keep opening into finer and finer remembrances and frequencies in the being. And so what we are speaking of here is how we open to the sense of being, the peace, the ground, the stable silence. And then we've spoken here of how life starts to happen. And when we have the stable ground, we can receive life. But if we go a little deeper, what happens is that as we're resting in the being knows itself, the being confirms itself, simply being. And then this knowing starts to arise, a knowing in the being. And the knowing starts to feel like a flow and aliveness, an alive knowing within the presence of being that knows itself. It's the true knowledge. And this is actually the flow of intelligence. The flow of intelligence is the flow of life. So as we open more to the finer frequencies in the being, and we have this sense of knowing, an unquestionable knowing, we start to feel a sense of oneness. We start to feel a sense of being life, being in harmony with life, being the aliveness of life, being the aliveness of the flow. We start to feel the aliveness of a certain oneness with this flow. It might be felt as a oneness with things or companions, or a oneness with parts of yourself that have been disparate and pushed away, right? So we start to feel this oneness that starts to feel like it includes more and more. And in the consciousness, this is where consciousness itself is recognizing itself and opening to finer and finer frequencies of itself. So it's felt as this flow of life. Now, of course, here, as we're opening to this flow of life and being life, we start to recognize that as life is happening, we have more openness to receive life, because aligned with this is more of a sense of openness of heart. We're more open to receive. So all of this that we're speaking of is one mechanism, right? They're not separate mechanisms. It's all one intelligence happening. And the way that we speak about it here is as one mechanism, and constantly opening to the being and inviting the deep rest of the peace and silence and stillness, which is the true safety and this radiant light of the wholeness that is needed for these places that life brings forward, that trigger the nervous system and the old stresses to be able to come forward. And we're just wanting to ensure that we really have an intricate, detailed way, we could say, of being with whatever might arise. Now, we go through this process together in many different ways as we meet and we bring forward the questions and the holding places, the inquiries, the stresses. When we meet one-to-one and we bring forward where there are challenges or where there are messages being exchanged, where we're speaking and sharing about these places. So there's many ways that we communicate around this, but we're wanting to ensure that there is all of these subtle places feel held, right? That there's a sense of the way. The way is the way of the intelligence. And we want to know that whatever arises, it can be met, received, held in presence, in true safety, when these situations in life arise that challenge our sense of safety, where we feel a threat in the nervous system. Because otherwise, what's happening is we're being with what feels safe. And we can mistake the sense of being here now with what is as the wide openness, with just being here with what feels safe. And now this is often what is happening when somebody brings forward a situation where something has arisen and there's been an attempting to be the being, and yet the trigger hasn't dissolved. And there can be the expressing, well, I've sat with it and I've been with the being, and yet the mind just feels like it's still just on fire and really active, or I just haven't been able to stay with the sensations, and I haven't been able to get out of this spin that is here. And the reason that this is because what's happening is that the sense of threat is up in the nervous system. And the mind is saying, I'm being the being. And that what is really happening is we're being with what we can safely open to, but we're not actually leaving the safety of our learned comfort place, which is the habit, the strategy of safety, which is really the me, right? It's another area of mind that's saying, I'm being the being and I'm trying and I'm doing everything I can. And why isn't it working? And I just want to come to the being and I want, but then what happens is that there's this spin of the mind that's saying, I want to get away from here. I want to get away from this discomfort. It's trying to be the being and get away. And everything is just not working because we're not actually truly opening to the wide open spaciousness of the being. And that's where we speak of, just be aware of it all. Be aware of it all. Be aware of the one that is triggered. Be aware of the stress in the nervous system. Be aware of the one that is feeling challenged, be aware of the voice that's trying to say, I am being the being, and I am surrendered, and be aware of every single voice, every single part of what is happening here, and just be the aware openness that can see it all, and it's all allowed. Don't try any more strategies. Don't layer on another strategy. Just stop and be aware of it all, right? And then what happens is often there'll just be an immediate relaxation that's like, oh, okay, yeah, I wasn't actually in the being, right? So many of you will recognize this happening. And sometimes we need, because we're in the spin and we're stuck in the safety mechanism of the me, and our safety is feeling threatened, that we need to be held by a companion or by this one that can just hold that presence that says, that can then, give us the reflection or the invitation, be aware of it all. And once we actually feel the presence of being here, a relaxation naturally happens into the true safety. Whether we're able to discover that within our own functioning, the wholeness of our own true functioning, or whether we need the companionship of being held. And this is where it's so important to allow ourselves to be held when we need to be held, because being held is the bridge and the way that we learn to facilitate ourselves. Because to facilitate ourselves, it takes an incredible maturity and adeptness to be able to facilitate ourselves, because we have to be able to meet a sense of traumatized lack of safety, feeling completely threatened and not move. And to do that within our own internal functioning is actually impossible to start with until we have been held in that place, and until we are established in the being, that we can open and allow these places that feel so threatened to open. So, what is happening in the unfolding is that there's more and more surfacing happening. So we're needing finer and finer subtlety of holding to allow everything that is wanting to surface. And the surfacing happens because there's a readiness, right? Things happen in life and surfacing happens because the consciousness has the maturity and readiness for surfacing to happen, right? For us to go deeper. And when there's a readiness to go deeper, then we might imagine that we want to go deeper into the being. And yes, we can go deeper into the being by resting in the being. But what we might start to feel like is, well, am I really deepening in the being? But it's this balancing that has to happen, that we go deeper into the being as we let go of the protections. And as the protections fall away, it's like the radiance of the heart and the openness of the heart and the felt sense of the being starts to become more radiantly known as the true essence nature. So just being here now, it actually doesn't matter what is being spoken, because what is being spoken is coming from the silence of being. So whatever is being spoken isn't about the mind's understanding. It's not about new information. It's not about new instructions. It's about revealing the intelligence, so that the intelligence that you are can recognize the way, and that the way is an intelligent, wise unfolding in consciousness. It's not actually a process within the psychological functioning. Although on a certain level, it might feel like that and look like that when we speak in the language of releasing suppression and repression. It might feel like it's happening in the psychological functioning, but in truth, the releasing that happens in the somatic field is actually happening in that wide open field of consciousness. And the wide open field of consciousness has to be free. It's this, right? It has to have a freedom and a flow for whatever is surfacing to surface into its fullness, right? Otherwise, it surfaces so much. And it's not that there's not a benefit to it surfacing so much, but if it wants to surface, if we can really allow and meet what's surfacing, it can fully come forward and release the tensions and stresses and the patterning, the discordant patterning in the field of consciousness, and come to a freedom. Now there's only this happening, okay, let's say on the level of consciousness and our conscious experience, this is all that's ever happening. And it can be spoken, there's only consciousness. What we also know is that there is God, the glory, which is prior to consciousness, before consciousness. And yet consciousness is the light, the divine light that creates the flow of consciousness. So it's all one. And these are the finer layers of resonant frequency that we open to as we release the discordant, concealed, deep frequencies that might be called repression. We release these frequencies that are basically stresses, old stresses in the nervous system that hold us in memory and past and constantly identifying with story. We release these patterns of consciousness into the freedom of the whole open field. And of course, as we release these patterns, the felt sense of consciousness knowing itself as the being also starts to feel more fine and clear and flowing, right? It's one mechanistic functioning, right? So nothing that's being spoken needs to be understood. And that's the glory, because it's the intelligence speaking to itself, and the intelligence that you are as consciousness recognizes itself, and it starts to attune to the frequencies and aliveness of itself, and it deepens in presence. And as there's a deepening in presence, you feel more of the being that you are. You feel more of the openness and the peace and the illumination of what you are. And you also, in this openness, start to be more open to the mechanistic. Let's try that again. The what is that word? And the mechanisms of consciousness, right? You start to be more open to the mechanics, the mechanisms that are functioning within your own intelligence, your own consciousness. And that's where it starts to resonate with a sense of, oh yeah, I get it, I see, right? It works like this. And it might feel like that's the mind understanding, but it's mind consciousness is not the intelligence. Mind consciousness is a denser frequency of consciousness. The intelligence that starts to understand its mechanics is a finer frequency, right? Anyway, none of it matters. It doesn't matter. You don't have to divide it because it's not divided. Only the mind wants to divide, right? So then when we are speaking about exploring and testing everything that's being spoken, exploring it, We're not speaking about the mind exploring it and making a project out of it. Of course, the exploration can only happen in your direct experience. So if your direct experience is about being the being and opening to the felt sense of, is there an aliveness here? Is there a flow here? No. Is there peace here? It's about exploring your direct experience where you are. It's not about trying to use concepts that the mind might have grabbed onto and trying to explore those, because that's never going to be the true exploration. The exploration that we speak of is in consciousness itself, right? So if it doesn't make sense and you don't know how, then let it go until the intelligence brings forward a natural exploration, right? Essentially, the exploration is being the being, being the awareness, watching, feeling, noticing. It's about all of the natural happening within the intelligent functioning of being the being, being the flow of life. And it's all completely natural, right? There's no efforting in this. There's no trying in this. It's about recognizing the naturalness of being yourself, right? So then there are ways that we can inquire, that we speak of when things are arising, right? We can start to inquire into what is happening in order to open and deepen. But the ways that we inquire, in a way, come forward in our interactions, right? That we start to bring forward the ways of inquiry, whether our interactions, again, are within our meetings or one-to-one. We start to bring forward the ways of inquiring and how to mature and deepen in the process of inquiry to be able to open more to what is happening. But again, there's an intelligence to this. There's a natural intelligence to all of this. And that intelligence is the flow of life. And it's the intelligence that brings the maturing and the ability and the readiness to go deeper, right? So we don't ever need to imagine that we have to conjure up and push for this opening to happen. There's a naturalness and a kindness. And honestly, you know, when there's a readiness to really go deeper, we can often actually, something big will usually come in, or there will be a feeling of stuckness that will bring forward the asking for help, which will then facilitate how to move to deepen and how to inquire more deeply and how to be with what is happening more deeply, right? So again, as there is more surfacing, we're starting to open more to the subtle ways that we can support what is trying to surface to be able to come forward and release. Because when surfacing wants to happen, it's discordant patterns in consciousness that feel like energy blocks or energetics, which are basically like discordant vibrations that have been held within the nervous system. The nervous system is consciousness trying to release themselves. And we of course want to be able to offer the greatest possible holding for these places to come forward. So just resting here in the simple presence of being, that whatever is being spoken is inviting the deepening of presence, the deepening of the recognition of being, that there's nothing to do, nothing that needs to happen. It's just about being here, just like this, simply, naturally being yourself. That the natural being, and this is a little exploration, that the natural being is open, boundless, that you can feel the sense of being, but you don't feel it located at any singular point, like the body or the mind, that the being is vaster. It's a sense of, to start with, of feeling like an expansion, but the expansion is the shift from the body-mind to the true boundless spaciousness of the being. So there's an openness, a sense of spaciousness and naturalness, that you can directly recognize the felt sense of presence that is here, open, natural. It's a felt sense of being everywhere, or of being nowhere, or of just being here. But we can feel here that there's a freedom from being the body and the mind, that you're not limited at the point of the body-mind, that you're unlimited as the being, that you're everywhere, open and free. And this sense of being the freedom, being the spaciousness, being the natural being, there's a peace here, a simplicity here, a silence, a stillness here. And as the stillness and silence of the presence of being is recognized within the being, it's like it comes more alive. It gets deeper. We could say it might be perhaps that the silence feels thicker and deeper and stronger. It might feel that the silence has this resonance of the nadam, like almost like it has a silent sound. It's very strong. It can feel very loud in a curious way. It can be that it just feels like a deep stillness and peace, like a deep, deep relaxation. And it can also feel very alive and like a flow of aliveness, where the presence feels to be very alive, right? So it's not trying to conjure anything up. It's just as the pointings come, a pointing is immediate. And either it's recognized, oh yeah, or you let it go, right? You don't try to conjure it. You don't try to find it. You just let it go if it's not naturally and immediately recognized, right? But as the words come, there might be a sense of, oh yeah, the silence does have a sound. Oh yeah, the silence is very awake and alive. And it doesn't matter what you discover, but it's about a true, honest exploration. There's no point trying to bring something here that's not here, because being the being is about being here without the mind that would want to try to conjure something up or make anything different. So we come to this felt sense of being that is just this here now. And we come to recognize and deepen in the ground of this true safety. Is there a sense of being able to recognize safety here? a safety that's found in the unmoving and unchanging. That this doesn't come and go, that this has always been here, that it's your essence nature. And if you don't feel the safety here, that's okay, let it go. Don't try to take anything on. It doesn't matter what you find here, just be here. So here we open to a sense of what is, just what's here. Just this, just yourself, just as you are, just like this, not creating a spiritual mood or an idea of what you think you should be, but just being here as yourself, open, natural, allowing thoughts to come and go if they're popping in and out, allowing any sensations of the body, allowing anything that's here, because as the being, you're the openness of this moment. You're not the content of the moment. You're the openness, the spaciousness, the unboundedness. And here, there might be a sense of a lightness, and the lightness might feel like a relaxed spaciousness, and the lightness might also feel like a light, like an illumined radiance or a brilliance here. And again, just allowing whatever is here to be here. The silence might feel like it has like a texture, a depth to it. And again, just allowing that there's a naturalness here. And it's the naturalness that is the freedom, because it's a relaxation out of the holding of the me, which is essentially a protection. It's a gripping. The whole egocentric patterning is a gripping and a protection and a sense of safety that has been learned, right? So as we come to this true openness, there can be this sense of a true safety. And it's in this true sense of safety, of openness, where we can start to receive life. We can start to receive the moving, changing by being aware of it and recognizing the being doesn't move and change. The true essence nature doesn't move in the face of anything. And this allows us to be the light, to be the presence and the unconditional welcoming of love in the face of anything that arises. Now, of course, it's going to be sticky to start with. It's going to be sticky for a while, right? And that's okay. Knowing the ground of being is the knowing that allows everything to be as it is. And as we mature and deepen, there's a recognition that whatever arises, the being is never touched by anything. And it then becomes this beingness, the true light that can illuminate and be the presence for whatever is arising. And then this balancing starts to happen, right? Where you start to notice more ease in life, more ability to meet things, not so much reactivity. Or even when stresses arise, there's a sense of, well, I welcome it because I just want to meet everything, right? We just start to have more natural openness and an ability then to inquire into what is this arising? What are these strategies? What is the holding pattern? Who are you? What do you believe about yourself when you're holding in these patterns? How does it serve you? Or does it not serve you? We start to be able to create a bridge between the holding and the being, through inquiry and the presence of love, so that these deep places can surface into the presence of unconditional love, right? Everything is held in love. Everything essentially, in essence, is love. But if we don't know that and we don't feel safe, there's no point hearing it a million times, because no amount of saying it is going to bring a sense of safety. Only the actual presence of safety will bring a sense of safety for these deeply held places to naturally surface and release their constricted vibration and discordance, right? So this is the natural opening that is happening, and the natural balancing, and how this unfolding has its own way that is intelligent, right? The way that we open in our unique flowering is according to the intelligence. Nothing is ever wrong. So there's never any point the mind looking, let's say, back at a journey of life and finding anything as having been wrong. It doesn't serve in any way. Everything that has happened in the unfolding is exactly according to the intelligence. And the deeper that we come to know ourselves as the intelligence, the deeper that we come in to know the consciousness, and then to know the oneness, the knowing that there's never been anything out of place, that dwelling upon the past and the possibility of anything wrong having happened, however stressful it might seem, it doesn't serve us at all. And in a way, if there's a wanting to dwell upon something, in a way that is an opportunity really just to inquire about what is this energy trying to surface. Because if there's a sense of wanting to point a finger somewhere, or think, well, why wasn't it this way? Why didn't I come to this? Or, questioning, it's like, what's useful in that is being with the actual energy that's trying to surface in the moment. Being with the story in the past isn't useful, because it's taking us into the mind consciousness and away from the safety that allows everything to surface. Now we allow the mind consciousness to surface and to find its true nature. Nothing could ever be any other way than the way it is. And as we really open to realize what we are in the mechanics of this intelligence, we recognize that everything has been a divine orchestration. Everything has been a flow of grace. And whether it's that we need to see it in terms of having been carried through karmic obscurations and experiences, or whether we just say that consciousness has to experience itself in all of the configurations that it experiences itself in order to refine and mature and be humbled, right? It's as if it plays out as a purification of the mind and the heart, in order to bring a readiness to start to open more deeply to the true nature. And as we open more deeply to the true nature, if we have unresolved traumas and stresses, then resolving them in the heart, in the being, is going to be a part of this unfolding, is going to be a part of the way. So we can imagine that awakening is an awakening away from suffering. And on some level, it is getting away from suffering, but it isn't getting away from the resolution of the traumas and the stresses that are already held in the nervous system. And it doesn't mean that we get away from having to move through the process of refining and surfacing everything that is already held in the nervous system. It means that the perspective shifts, so we're not suffering in it by cycling and repeating it. It changes from being a cycle of misery and suffering to be a cycle of transmutation, right? Once we know about the possibility of transmutation, we stop suffering the stresses and we start transmuting them. And this is the glory of coming to this whole unfolding into wholeness. We could say the way to wholeness, unfolding into integral wholeness, unfolding into the remembrance of wholeness, right? In a way, this is what we're up to here, right? We're up to the unfolding into the remembrance of integral wholeness. And we could call that divinity, the divine nature. We could call that innocence. We're unfolding into the innocence and wholeness of the essential nature that is before we learn to protect and defend, right? So there's a way of seeing this whole unfolding that gets called awakening and enlightenment that can be very focused upon the transcendent. There's a way of seeing it which could be spoken as, instead of more of what we call that, more of that Shiva awakening, where we focus on the transcendent and enlivening the being, that there's more of this, in a way, what we sometimes call like the Shakti opening, which the way that we could speak of it is that we are the essential natural being, and that in the life we came in as the natural essential being, and we learnt to protect and defend ourselves, because in that moment of divine orchestration, according to the laws of karma and the laws of nature, the way that life played created a sense of defense, protection, and conditioning within our functioning. And in a way, what this is about releasing all of the protections and holding patterns in order to restore the natural remembrance and connection to the innocent divine wholeness and the being that we are, right? It's a way of speaking about it that is very ordinary, right? And sometimes ordinariness is really good, and sometimes glorious divinity is really wonderful, right? It doesn't really matter ever about the language, and the language will move according to the laws of nature and how everything is wanting to unfold in the moment. But it's a lesser known way of speaking about this unfolding. It's not glamorous, right? And it's not the kind of escape and exalted salvation that the mind might be looking for. And yet it is true salvation, right? It's freedom from the mind. It's complete freedom from the mind. And it's freedom from the mind patterns that are protections and defenses, so that it really, in freedom from the mind, we come to remember the freedom that we are, the natural, essential being that we are, the innocence that we are, the presence of being that we are, that is whole, undivided reality, right? So all of this is kind of playing with language and words a little bit to enliven and illuminate that it doesn't matter how we speak about it. It doesn't matter if we have been carried more in the transcendent first, or more in the bhakti first, or more in the psychological first even. Right? Some beings have moved through more of a therapeutic unfolding in the psychological realms of working with trauma and that before they come to this kind of call to know the true essence nature. And in a way, here we're incorporating all of that, bringing it all together in an integrated way that can speak to anyone where they are in this unfolding, and meet anyone where they are in this unfolding, and allow anyone and everyone to be exactly where they are in this unfolding without making it wrong or right or better or worse, but that this whole unfolding is one evolutionary process. It's not personal and special and divided. It's not your awakening. It's in a way the awakening of consciousness to itself and then to God, right? And within our functioning that seems to be at a point, the individual is never divided from the whole. And so the individual is really the unique laws of nature moving. So it doesn't matter how we have moved through this unfolding, what we've been carried into. What I can confirm is that whatever way it happens, it brings us to what we are longing for, right? And this is bringing in another thread, the thread of the longing. It brings us to what we are longing for, using the intelligence of the natural way, according to our laws of nature, according to like a coming together, like a complete confluence of all that we are. In a way, our laws of nature, maybe the laws of karma, and it's like we get brought together in our sense of the individual, in a flow of oneness, which is this evolutionary flow of consciousness within itself, to know its divinity, to know its wholeness, and that it seems to be happening within your individual functioning, but your individual functioning is never divided and has never been divided from the whole. And this whole unfolding is a way of revealing all of that. But we start where we are. We start where we are here now. We work where we are here now. And that's why it's only ever about what's here now. What is here now? Are you resting in the being, in a sense of freedom and glory? Then great. Is there something arising that feels stressful? Is there something happening in the body? And we meet whatever's arising in the presence of now, and we allow and inquire into what's here that feels discordant in the field, to allow whatever feels to be discordant to be welcomed and to be able to come forward on the trajectory of safety, presence, love, and a depth of holding that welcomes it fully, right? So in a way, what we're speaking of here is like a map of the whole landscape of this unfolding, this way, this natural way of unfolding into the integral wholeness of the essential nature, which can, of course, be called the true self, the being, the heart, the glory, God, whatever. But we are following, here we are following a natural intelligence that is, let's say, which is the guidance, right? It's the guidance, and the guidance is the intelligence. And we all have access to the intelligence because we are the intelligence. So we all have access to the natural guidance when we are resting in the being and opening to the intelligence and inviting the intelligence to come forward. And in a way, that's what inquiry is. Inquiry is the recognition within our own intelligence of what is intelligently trying to surface, and that we use the intelligence to inquire, to allow whatever is wanting to surface because it's ready to release itself into the wholeness, into the light, that we can bring it forward through meeting it in loving, unconditional presence, allowing the wisdom of the narrative and inquiring to invite and create a bridge of acknowledgement and validation, we could even say, so that we have a new direct experience of being able to feel what we weren't able to feel, that got suppressed and repressed, and that it's allowed to fully surface into the light and love and naturalness, and discover its innocence, that everything that is tangled up in stories of trauma, hurt, upset, can untangle into the remembering of innocence that is the essential nature right inside the pure consciousness that's right inside the tangle of discordant consciousness. So, we're speaking of the way of wholeness. So resting here, receiving yourself here, receiving the goodness, the innocence of true knowing of yourself here, that really this unfolding is out of the sense of limitation, lack, that something is missing, something is wrong with me, which is the great misunderstanding that creates the sense of separation. The story that I am unlovable, unworthy, not enough, I'm broken, I'm flawed, I'm imperfect. And we are bringing this story to the surface to meet the essential wholeness and safety of the being, where the remembering of wholeness is restored, the remembering of innocence is restored, that we stop moving in this protected story of lack, and we start moving to remove and release the holding patterns that keep that story repeating and repeating, and so that we can move from the wide openness of our true essential innocent wholeness. So in this map, this map of this intelligence, of this way of wholeness, it is to just find yourself where you are here now. It's not locating yourself in comparison. It's finding yourself in the resonance of what is being spoken. That you can find yourself in a resonance, a recognition in certain pointers that are being spoken. That you can find a depth of the being, and you can also find certain pointers and illuminations of what is happening in this unfolding that can help you just root more deeply into the being and the natural safety and allowing of all that is happening as life, right? That we can trust life. Such a big part of our young experience that I hear again and again and again, and I know had to be met here, is that I don't trust life. I don't trust people. I don't trust that life is good. I don't trust that people are good. And of course not, right? Because that's the me trying to trust the moving, changing. So we have to shift and meet all of these kind of places where we can meet these places in a depth of natural, true safety, and not so much a trust, but more of a faith, a deep known faith in the oneness, in the glory of God, that allows us to unravel this deep sense of mistrust and the misunderstanding of separation into the remembering of wholeness.